Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in to hear autopilot. Thanks for tuning in to this first batch of spooky movie reviews for October 2024. Here are the films that I've watched in the last 7 days or so. Before I get started, I do have a few notes, mainly for the benefit of those of you who haven't been here as long, don't know me as well. I picked these movies, so obviously I consider them spooky to some degree. You may not, and that's okay, just bear in mind that horror tastes differ. Some of my viewers don't like the genre at all and won't touch it, they won't be interested in any of these movies, but if they watch the video anyway, I hope they enjoy it. Others are huge fans and will watch pretty much anything. As for me, I am very selective. I like some scary stuff, but there are a lot of movies I have no interest in, and I avoid ones with occult subject matter and gratuitous sexual content. That's a lot of them, which is why I don't ever describe myself as a horror movie fan. You can't really call yourself a fan of the genre and then be like, oh, but there's thousands of movies that I want nothing to do with. So there's that. Also, some of the titles I review this month will be obscure. That's not intentional, I'm not doing that on purpose, I have nothing against watching famous movies, rewatching old favorites. That's just how it turns out. For me, this is an opportunity to cross off at least a few of the hundreds of recommendations that I've received, and many times what people suggest to me are lesser-known films from the past. So there may be some titles that you never heard of before, and I hadn't either. But as is always the case with my mini review collections, I promise there will be variety. So that's the setup, and now here we go. Movie number 1 is a TV movie and a viewer recommendation, 1974's Scream of the Wolf. People are getting savagely killed by some sort of wolf-like creature. Peter Graves investigates, seeking assistance from his former close friend and big game hunter, Clint Walker. This was a compact thriller with some big names attached. Dan Curtis produced and directed it, and Richard Matheson wrote the teleplay. They had worked together on The Night Stalker a couple years before. The quality of the upload I watched on YouTube was pretty poor. The well-lit scenes look okay, and you can identify Peter Graves in any lighting thanks to his hair, but anything shot in the dark is almost impossible to see, and that's pretty much all the scary scenes. It's hard to get scared when you're staring at a few pixely blobs and you have no idea what they're supposed to represent. And unfortunately, that's the case with a lot of these older 70s TV movies. It's got some great 70s music, though, featuring the wah-wah pedal, and while Clint Walker is uncharacteristically cryptic and weird here, Peter Graves gives us a nice, normal protagonist. The middle part gets kind of slow and boring, but in general, it's an interesting enough little movie. We go from one wolf-centric movie to another, which is going to make some of you question what I said about variety. Movie number 2 is 2011's The Grey. Liam Neeson stars in this horror thriller in which a plane carrying a team of oil workers crashes in the Alaskan wilderness. The few survivors find themselves being stalked by a pack of wolves. Now this is more like it. Scream of the Wolf really didn't have much tension, but this is a scary wolf movie. Liam Neeson is solid as usual, playing the knowledgeable hunter who becomes the de facto leader, though not everyone is on board with that. And while trying to pull the men together, he's wrestling with his own troubles. There's lots of swearing in this, but surprisingly, while there's a good deal of blood and violence, I didn't find it a super gory film. Certain aspects are reminiscent of that movie Frozen, where 3 young adults get stranded on a ski lift and wolves start coming after them. That movie was disgusting and I hated the entire experience. This actually, I'm not going to say that it wasn't gross at all, but by comparison, it seemed a little tamer. Probably because most of the attack scenes are edited in such a way that you can't clearly make out what's happening. The whole film is very tense, though, and it's got excellent sound. Howling, growls, yips, wind roaring, snow crunching, fire crackling. They do a great job with the point of view stuff during the crash sequence and underwater. I thought it was realistic and creative. And there are two visual moments that stood out to me. Number one is when the men stare out into the night and gradually several pairs of eyes appear glowing back at them in the darkness. And number two, a shot that's held for a very long time, slowly zooming in as we wait and listen. And it's one of those things where you start checking the edges of the screen for movement. Ooh. And no spoilers, but if you do choose to watch this film, make sure you watch the whole thing. My parents and I were debating the ending as the credits rolled, and then all of a sudden there was a quick post-credit scene that changed things a bit. So if you watch the film, keep an eye out for that. And now we're done with wolves, we're moving on from that. Movie number 3 is a viewer recommendation, 1928's The Fall of the House of Usher. This is a silent version of the Edgar Allan Poe story in which a man is summoned by his friend Roderick Usher to help his sick wife Madeline, who suffers from a mysterious malady. This was directed by Jean Epstein, a French film, not German, as I originally thought, although it does have many trademarks of the German expressionist movement. It's a moody film, it makes some bizarre choices, but they all contribute to a sense of unease, paranoia, and wrongness. There are interesting camera tricks and some eerie performances. The doctor, in particular, was very creepy, and I don't really know why. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece. Though it's only 63 minutes long, it's a little slow-moving at times. And yet it's also kind of jumpy and jerky. Average shot length is unusually short for a late 1920s film, I would say, which is a point in its favor. But, a lot of the transitions seemed a little rough, at least in the print that I was watching. As far as the plot goes, I feel that making Madeline Roderick Usher's wife instead of his sister messes up the story. The mania is supposed to be a family curse, a pollution in the blood, and you can read something else into that if you want to. So by taking away the hereditary factor, it no longer makes sense. Also, it's got a disadvantage being a silent film. The central character becomes hypersensitive to noise of any kind, so sound is a big deal. It's harder to convey that in a silent film. The version I watched on YouTube, however, does feature a new music score that was composed by uploader Floyd Pienka, who also added the English intertitles, and I think it's a very good score. At times it sounds old, as if it came out with the movie in 1928, and at other times it is jarringly modern, which is an effect in and of itself. And the inclusion of certain sounds helps a lot. It does some heavy lifting. The film's got a good build-up to the famous climax, but while the house's interiors are visually striking, the exterior shots leave a lot to be desired, and it's a pity they didn't have more money to spend. Unless it was supposed to look small and flimsy? So the ending was kind of disappointing, and I had some other quibbles with the film, but while it's not deliciously weird like Roger Corman's House of Usher from 1960, it does have some good imagery, it's a decent version of the story, and it gave me goosebumps a couple times. Movie number 4 is kind of a viewer recommendation, though I already had it on my radar, 1980's Virus. A new and extremely deadly virus is accidentally unleashed, killing millions around the world. An international assortment of researchers in Antarctica wait desperately for news while trying to decide the right course of action now that life as we know it seems to be over. This was actually a Japanese production directed by Kinji Fukasaku, and it was released in Japan as Fukatsu no Hi, which can be translated as Day of Resurrection. Actor Masao Kusakari leads an international cast, featured co-stars including Olivia Hussey, Chuck Connors, George Kennedy, Bo Svensson, Henry Silva, Robert Vaughn, and Glenn Ford as the U.S. President. I'd been wanting to see this for a long time. I unintentionally ended up saving it for Spooky Movie Month, and some of you might balk at that, but it certainly fits my criteria. I have always found pandemic movies extremely tense and more than a little scary, and as it turns out, this also crosses over into another stressful apocalyptic subgenre later on. I thought the production, ambitious as it was very well done. It's not quite as thorough as later films of its ilk, but still comprehensive. It's not super gross with regard to the sickness, but it does have a few grim visuals and distressing scenarios. It features quite a dramatic and sweeping score, including a love theme that plays over the opening and closing credits, which obviously channels the morning after from the Poseidon adventure. The singer sounded so familiar, and it was driving me crazy, and finally I was like, you know what? Her voice reminds me of that upbeat, melancholy song about how awful it is to be 17 and ugly, but I couldn't remember her name or the name of the song, and I was only able to remember a few phrases from the song. The song has so many words to it, complicated lyrics, but all I could come up with were these random phrases from one little part that always gets stuck in my head whenever I hear the song on the radio. And so I'm like, it's that song about being 17, but it's not the one when I was 17, it was a very good year. It's not that one. It's the one about, girls with ravaged faces, no social graces, on the phone, murmured vague obscenities, that one, whatever that's called. And finally, I put all these things into Google, and Google came back with the info that I was thinking of the 1975 hit At 17, which was written and performed by Janice Ian. And to make a long story short, the Virus song sounded like it was sung by her because it was. Janice Ian wrote and performed Toujours Guy Mon Cher, also known as You Are Love, and oh my goodness, what a journey it took to figure that out. This is not a widely known film, but on YouTube you can find a few versions, varying in quality and length. The original international version is 2 hours and 36 minutes, while the US release is only 1 hour and 48 minutes. I'm assuming that a lot of the Japanese scenes have been cut from the US release, which you can probably do without hurting the narrative, but you do lose some of the human drama and character development, some of the scenes of panic and people getting sick and dying. Wow, I'm really selling you on this movie. I wanted the full version, but with subtitles for the non-English scenes only. I'm not sure that exists. I thought I had found one, but the Japanese wasn't being translated, so 10 minutes in, we were like, nope, this isn't gonna work. I finally found one that had all the dialogue in English subtitles, which turned out to be an acceptable compromise, especially when there were a couple scenes that also had German and Spanish dialogue. And the picture is very good as well. That's the version I've linked to in the description. I liked this movie, and if this kind of thing is also your cup of tea, you should check it out. Movie number 5 is a viewer recommendation, 1966's Terror Beneath the Sea. During a press demonstration of a new underwater missile system, a man-shaped thing is spotted whizzing past the camera. 2 journalists go diving and encounter it again, but the military can't or won't provide answers. This is a Japanese-American co-production that stars Sunny Chiba and Peggy Neal. I don't know the history of it, or if there's a Japanese language version out there. I should have looked that up before I filmed this. What I watched on YouTube was a slightly cropped American dub. And it wasn't a terrible dub, because most of the actors seem to be speaking their own dialogue, and therefore the voices aren't horribly distracting. The film has a rocky opening, darting here and there and making like it's going to be a lukewarm ripoff of The Creature from the Black Lagoon, but then it heads in a new direction, and the result is a decent sci-fi horror flick with some shades of Frankenstein. The demented bad guy high on his own villainy is amusing, the monster design is striking, and I like the bold photography, and there are some yucky experiment sequences. It does have some stiff acting, some laughable line readings, and some hilariously awkward gunfights, but I think what's good about it can overshadow its shortcomings if you give it that chance. Movie number 6 is a documentary about one of the most outrageous cases of stolen identity in recent history, 2012's The Imposter. In 1994, 13-year-old Nicholas Barkley disappeared. 3 years later, someone in Spain surfaced claiming to be him, and despite several glaring discrepancies, the family welcomed him as their lost son. True crime documentaries are absolutely appropriate for spooky season. Sometimes they're scarier than what you see in the movies. These are things that really happened, stories being told by the people involved, and they are often horrific demonstrations of the depravity of man. I heard about this from a video recommending disturbing documentaries, and I would say that as far as true crime goes, this is far from the most disturbing thing out there, but it is a creepy, troubling tale. The case has numerous twists, and how the filmmakers handle them is interesting. Each party is allowed to represent him or herself, and the documentary may seem partial to one side over another, but then more information is revealed, and ultimately, the audience is left to reach their own conclusion, which I found very difficult. I'm not going to say any more about the case, except that the lack of resolution makes this even more unsettling, and no matter how you slice it, there's something wrong here. And movie number 7 is 2022's Megan, or Mithrigan, as I remember hearing Jeremy Jahns call it. After suddenly becoming the guardian of her orphaned niece, a robotic toy inventor brings home the prototype for an emotionally responsive doll. The doll bonds with the child and becomes her closest companion, and vows she won't let anyone do her harm. I'm often up for a good creepy AI movie, or a machines becoming sentient and homicidal and wanting to take over the world movie, and this certainly fits the bill. In the last 2 years, AI technology has advanced so much and become so much more prevalent, it's practically being forced down our throats, and I would say that the initial premise is now alarmingly plausible. It didn't seem outside the realm of possibility when this first came out, but now it's like, I don't know, this could be right around the corner, and I don't like that. I think I would describe the film as Westworld meets Child's Play, with a little more emphasis on the latter given the diabolical turn things take and the occasional tongue-in-cheek attitude. I did find the tone a bit uneven. Sometimes it takes its emotional scenes seriously, but other times it's a little more offbeat, a little more silly, definitely bombastic in certain scenes, which had me thinking, is this a straight horror movie, or is it kind of a comedy? There are 2 versions, a theatrical cut and an unrated cut, which you can watch on the Blu-ray. I had heard that the unrated cut was better, so I was going to watch that, and then I was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Who am I listening to? So I looked up the differences between the 2 of them, and the unrated cut just has more graphic kills, more blood, and more F-bombs, considerably more language. And I was like, you know what? I don't need that! So I went with the theatrical cut, and that was quite enough. There is a lack of likable characters to root for. The protagonist really isn't much of a protagonist, and the niece is a brat. I felt sorry for her, but she is a brat, and some of the supporting performances were rough. But they did a great job with the doll puppet. Special effects and the voice and everything are impressive. Did I like the movie? I'm really not sure. It was okay. And that wraps up this first group of spooky mini-reviews. I hope you enjoyed the video. You can find a list of the films in the description below. I hope you found something to catch your interest, and I will be back with another batch next week. Thanks for watching.